Chapter 5, A Secret Diary. In December, Malala's worst fear came true. An order came from the Taliban. Girls' schools in Mingora would not reopen after the winter break. The Taliban said boys could go back to school, but girls would not be returning. Malala and her friends were devastated. Could this be true? What would life be like if they couldn't go to school? One day, a BBC reporter in Pakistan asked Ziauddin for help. The BBC Urdu website was looking for a teacher to write about the school closings in Mingora. Ziauddin talked to some teachers, but they refused. They were afraid of the Taliban. Writing about what was happening in their city was much too dangerous. Malala had spoken out before, and she had enjoyed it. In September 2008, she had given a speech at a local club for reporters. The title of her speech was, "How Dare the Taliban Take Away My Basic Right to Education?" Newspapers all over Pakistan printed her words. She was glad to tell people how strongly she felt. She had said what she believed, and nothing bad had happened. Ziauddin thought his daughter might be the perfect person to write the blog for the BBC. He asked Malala. She was only 11. She didn't know much about writing journals, but she was ready to try. The BBC. The British Broadcasting Corporation, known as the BBC, is based in London, England. It broadcasts TV shows, radio programs, and webcasts all over the world, including BBC America. Journalists from the BBC report the news from all countries in many different languages. Malala's blog, Diary of a Pakistani Schoolgirl, was originally published on the BBC Urdu website. Malala's parents talked it over with the man from the BBC. Everyone knew that Malala would do a good job, but there was much to consider. Malala was worried that something bad might happen to her father if she wrote the blog. The man from the BBC was worried about Ziauddin, too. He was also worried about Malala. Ziauddin wasn't worried about Malala. No one would hurt a child, he thought. That seemed impossible, out of the question. The man at the BBC talked to Malala and her parents many times. Finally, it was decided. Malala would write the blog under one condition. She would use a fake name. Malala's blog would be called Diary of a Pakistani Schoolgirl. She would use the name Gul Makai. This was the name of a strong girl in a famous Pashtun folktale. Malala would write notes and read them to the reporter every day on the phone. She would tell him how she and her friends were feeling and what was going on at home and in school. The reporter would put her words onto the website. The BBC website started to publish Diary of a Pakistani Schoolgirl on January 3, 2009, in Urdu and in English. Other blog posts followed. Malala's words were about getting ready for school and studying for her tests. All the girls worried that school might not reopen after winter break. There was bombing in the night, and the girls were afraid. They were afraid that their school would be destroyed, like so many other schools in Mingora. However, the Pakistan army was fighting the Taliban. Maybe they would win and school wouldn't close after all. At the same time, the New York Times newspaper was making a film about the Taliban, who were taking over the Swat district and closing girls' schools in Mingora. The film featured Malala and her father. The cameras roamed Mingora for 6 months, filming the fighting between the Pakistan Army and the Taliban fighters. Gunfire was heard everywhere. People were desperate to get out of the city. Terrified men, women, and children climbed onto the roofs of overcrowded buses and trucks that were leaving. Malala and Ziauddin talked about the bombs that exploded outside their home night after night, making it impossible to sleep. Malala said her father could no longer walk her to school. It was too dangerous for him to be seen outside. She liked her blue school uniform, she said, but now she couldn't wear it. The few students who still attended dressed in plain clothes so the Taliban wouldn't know where they were going. Her school would soon close, she said, covering her face, trying not to cry. She wanted to be a doctor. Doctors must study for many years. How could she ever realize her dream if there was no school to go to? In January 2009, the Taliban did the very thing that Malala had been dreading. All girls' schools would close for good on January 15th. Boys' schools would stay open, but girls would have to remain at home. On January 14th, when school was over, Malala said goodbye to Moniba and all her other friends. No one knew what would happen next. Malala spent the days reading, getting into fights with her brothers, and talking to the BBC reporter. By February, Diary of a Pakistani Schoolgirl was being read all over Pakistan and in many other parts of the world. Malala continued writing it through March 12th. The name Gul Makai was becoming well known in Swat. People wondered who it was. Malala didn't tell anyone. Because Ziauddin had started schools for girls, many people wanted to interview him about what was happening in the Swat Valley. They wanted to talk to his daughter, too. Malala appeared on Pakistani talk shows. The host asked her questions about the war and school closings in Mingora. Most people in Pakistan believed in education for girls. They were upset about what was happening in the Swat Valley. Many had read Malala's diary. The Taliban leaders had to listen. In February, it seemed as if the Taliban was having a change of heart. They announced that girls could go back to school. Malala and her friends couldn't wait to return to their studies. But even though some girls' schools were open again, the fighting in Mingora got worse. It was dangerous to walk in the city. Many students stayed home. Others left the city with their families. By May, Ziauddin saw there was no choice. He closed his schools again. Malala and her family packed what they could and hurried out of Mingora. They spent the next few months living in the houses of relatives in safer cities nearby. Malala missed her books, her friends, and especially her school. But she was glad to be away from Mingora and the sound of exploding bombs. On July 24th, the Ch5 family finally returned home. Mingora was a bombed-out shell of what it had once been. The war was over, and the Taliban had moved into the hills. That was good. But the Taliban fighters knew who Malala was. She had spoken in public. She had been on TV. Many people had read her BBC diary or watched the New York Times film. People were talking about her. In August, Malala's school finally reopened. Malala was too busy studying to worry about the Taliban. She had a new dream now. She wanted to become a politician. Politicians work to pass laws that they believe will benefit their country. Malala wanted to make sure that all children everywhere had the opportunity for an education.